Righto, good afternoon everybody and welcome to another episode of NMH at 1. With me in the studio today is Albe Botha, editor of the Republican newspaper. Welcome here.
Thank you, Jareen.
So first off, we're just going to have a quick look at what was news in other newspapers. We're starting off with the New Era that reported on the minister in the presidential office who was fined, or who is in a lot of hot water because she defaced a Namibian banknote. She actually can face a fine of up to $100,000.
Sure.
It's a lesson to everyone. Okay, and then from down south in Keetmanshoop, the regional and the magistrates court in Keetmanshoop is open again today with 115 cases on the court roll, which is actually quite dramatic. And then finally, the Namibian reports on how a lack of masks has actually led to some wonderful initiatives for businesses all over the country for some hard-earned cash.
Looking very quickly at some statistics about COVID-19. First of all, just confirmed cases. This was for 3rd of May, which was Sunday. You will see there total samples tested 1,137, 15 new samples, of which one was discarded on that specific day. We can tell you that this morning the samples as of yesterday stood at 1,181, so that's 44 new samples tested. But of course, Jareen, that is over 2 days. Concern that tests are dropping a bit, but the long weekend of course played a role. Also quite just basically, the United Nations has announced that they will reallocate $3.7 million of funding for Namibia, and that will take into account health requirements as well as the social impact of COVID-19. Then also the United Nations earmarked $1.85 million for Namibia, especially for the fight against COVID-19. Looking very quickly at quarantine data as it stood also on Sunday, you will see there a total of 280 people were still in quarantine on Sunday. Sunday, 34 new people entered quarantine and 10 people were discharged. And yesterday, the total figure stood at 305 people in quarantine. That is what, as far as COVID-19 goes. And Oshikoto region is the only region in Namibia where no one has been quarantined up to date.
Wow, good news for them.
Yes, indeed. And then also, of course, news in basically all the newspapers today, and one would have expected that. Yesterday, a bit later in the afternoon, an alleged pedophile and child pornographer made his first appearance in court. He's facing more than 40 charges, and that is the 49-year-old Mr. Johan Maree here of Windhoek, and they basically, Jareen, caught him through Interpol links from overseas, so you can read all the detail of that in today's newspapers.
Yes, I think that whole incident took everyone by storm, and it makes you realize that we don't live in a safe place at all, and predators can be all over. Righto, next, our colleague Jana Marie Smith visited a lovely kindergarten this morning, and she shared with us this video.
One pandemic has really affected parents very badly, but one thing which they are happy is that since the pandemic came, we only closed 1 week, and then somebody came in, that is now a development workshop, came in to help us with the food stuff for nutritional food. The children were coming to get the worksheets, which we were printing, and then the parents are going to do the worksheets at home. And then from there, every Tuesday they come, they pick up worksheets and the food packages. So one thing which they are grateful is that their children continue to learn. And on top of that one, also they get nutritional food every week for that matter. Basically, now we are busy again soliciting some funds. We will in fact be happy if someone, a good Samaritan out there, happen to notice that, yeah, these children also need. We cater for 85 kids, so which needs also that one. Children, one thing which I know, they don't need much. Anything little you give, they appreciate. The same with parents.
We say, okay, now there's a lot of e-learning being talked about. Children should learn at home. How are the children in informal settlement going to do this? So then we approached Kid Care College with the idea that we can assist them. They just use their own worksheets. We maybe assist with making copies, and we facilitate that parents comes at slots and they receive worksheets, explanation from the teachers, information about the COVID-19 and general hygiene, how to hand wash and so on. And then they can do the worksheets for a week and come back. But we also added a feeding component because we realized many parents lost their income. They used to sell tomatoes or whatever it is. Now they can't do that. And so basically we are now, the pilot was successful with the 1 kindergarten. We're now scaling up. And we are scaling up to 20 kindergartens. So 10 in Samora Machel and 10 in Moses Garweb constituency. And then, and that comes with food vouchers. We're not doing food parcels anymore in a sense of physical food, but we give food vouchers and people can go to the shops. And our goal is to reach 135 kindergartens, both in Samora Machel and Moses Garweb, reaching about 5,000 children. One thing with the teachers, with the parents being involved now, when I was here in the previous weeks, hearing from parents, is that they are appreciative of this project. It's not about really the food only. That obviously comes as a relief, but it's that their children are able to continue learning at home. And I think it motivates them to realize that I can actually be involved in my child's education. Now they know what my child does when they're in kindergarten.
Actually, the pandemic has been really, it's not something usual, and to us we were really not prepared for this. But the kids care, of course, since we enrolled him also only this year, is really helping for him in educating him and also providing some food, because myself also at the moment, I'm just also home because of this coronavirus and I lost my job. So at the moment, for that, in case, it's just for him it's okay, because exactly if a kid is hungry, then obviously then there is stress. Of course you will be worried. So with the kids care, providing this, it's really useful. It is helping a lot for him, also his mindset, also building his mind.
You will see someone very special. Someone very special. Because it's me.
The following footage shows then the first court appearance yesterday in Windhoek by Johan Maria, 49, on charges of alleged pedophilia and child pornography. This video was taken by Ronel Rademeyer.
Right, and after that material, our colleague Justisha Shipena was reacting to rumours this morning on the Social Security being announced as a pay point. Of course, it seems not to be true, because the Ministry of Finance has now called on people to stop applying for the emergency income grants because they are still busy processing it.
Yes, so apparently the message is still for people to wait. I've two guys that I employ working at my home. They both applied. They both only received the message wait. And yesterday, Jareen, they let me know there's a message. I don't know if it's a SMS doing the rounds in Katatura that people must go to the Social Security Commission. But government says no, people must not go and queue anywhere. So we really hope that the people still wanting EIGs can be sorted out soon.
We are currently outside the Social Security Commission, where the people who were rejected for the $750 were invited to come and claim today.
Righto, that is the first bit of our program, but Dani and I are going to end off now because what follows is an interview between Frank Stephan and our CEO, Mr. Albe Botha, on our plans forward. As many people have seen already, everybody is in dire straits. The media is not exempt, but our boss has many plans ahead. Please stay tuned for that.
And very important, Jareen, it's not about NMH only. They will be discussing general economic issues which a lot of businesses face at the moment. And as we know, a lot of businesses, apart from Namibia Media Holdings, has already asked people to take pay cuts. We wish you a very nice Wednesday, but stay tuned for this interview.
Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome back. My name is Frank Stephan. I'm the editor of Allgemeine Zeitung. We're obviously part of the Namibia Media Holdings Group. And with me in the studio is Albe Botha, the CEO of NMH. Welcome, Albe.
Good morning. It's my first time on the show, so I'm very honored to be here.
Yes, this is obviously all new for both of us, being an NMH at one. I almost made a mistake just now, still into the old COVID groove. So, yeah, we're obviously here to discuss NMH a bit, the bold steps that we as a group are taking towards the future. From here onwards, we always see at the moment there's a lot of rattling of swords by the workers' unions. Then on the other hand, we've got demands being made by employees, employers, and it's a bit of a hodgy-bodgy, but nobody's coming to the point where we're actively taking steps, next steps after COVID. How will we proceed? What does the future hold for us? And Albe, you released a press statement yesterday in which you tried to explain how you see the future of NMH.
I think it's important that we realize that although we're not out of the woods yet in terms of the disease called COVID-19, that we are definitely having to face the reality of the economic devastation that this disease has created. Maybe nothing to do with what we've done wrong in our own country, and maybe nobody's done anything wrong, but the reality is that COVID-19 has destroyed millions of jobs. And in that environment, you have to find solutions. And what you can't do is ignore the reality. What you can't do is not come forward with an active plan of action. And what you can't do is wait and see. At the same time, we must realize that none of us that lives on Earth right now has ever experienced what's happening right now. So none of us really have the full understanding of what is waiting for us. So what we've done at NMH is to try and find an interim solution and most importantly protect the jobs of every individual that works here. I firmly believe that an economy is not defined by GDP but by people working. And ultimately an economy is not there to be a numbers game. It's about people and earning a living and having a livelihood. But we can't ignore the reality that the economy is and will continue to be slower, significantly slower than previous before. And that's what we try to achieve with our reduction of productive hours from 45 to 36, and trying just to find ways of understanding where this economy is taking us, aligning our resources accordingly, and making sure that every individual still comes back to a job every day. And we are focusing on this plan, not just in terms of waiting and seeing, but also at the same time understanding where the opportunities and the threats. Life is not always just about the good stuff. And we we're very excited about what waits for us.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we're saying here is it's all about protecting jobs, because at the end of the day, like it or not, media especially, I would think, but probably more other jobs as well, even in the tourism industry where you've got support. The biggest issue at the moment is that we see all these initiatives being taken, but they're all designed to really just assist those companies who've been in the tourism trade, in agriculture, but not really in business. Or do you see that different?
And I understand that resources are extremely limited, and therefore when government has to find interventions, they focus on those industries that are hit hardest, those individuals that are the most vulnerable, and you have to appreciate what government has done in that regard. And I totally salute government for their initiatives and the active way that they've been doing things. But the reality does remain that there's a large group, it's called most of us, that still have to go back to work every day, and hopefully there's still a job for us. And it's this 80% of the country that we need to say, what is the solutions for this group, those individuals, companies, businesses that are above the minimum thresholds called pay as you earn. Those are not closed down totally, but they don't live in isolation. We don't say, well, luckily I'm not in a tourist business, it doesn't affect me. It affects me as much as any other industry. And therefore, it's those groups that I think which we're trying to do as NMH more specifically, but collectively also saying, how do we find a solution for those of us that do come back to work, but we know that the economy in which we're working now is significantly lower or smaller, and we have to be practical about those solutions. And that's the group that we're focusing on. We're one of them.
Yeah, and do you quickly want to explain a bit how we approached it as a group in terms of salary reduction vis-a-vis pension holidays, those sort of items?
So what we've did is we actively looked at something called a payslip. It's a very powerful piece of information, and I've been saying this to everybody, that sharing information is a lot more than just the front page of a newspaper. It's your payslip as well. And we looked at the payslip and said, ultimately, right now where we are as an individual, myself included, is not necessarily what is my CTC, my cost to company pay, but what money am I getting at the end of the month? And ultimately, that's where we are. And how do we minimize the impact on the take-home pay? And we went through every single item, from pension fund to medical aid. We're happy that the small contribution that Social Security has given us in terms of the contributions. And at every level, we challenged that cost. So that although our effective salary reduction on gross pay is at 20%, we believe that once you've applied all these implications, we're effectively at 10%. And at the same time, we have to appreciate that the country has realized, and the international community has realized, that the economy is slower. So you have something called interest rates that have come significantly down. So the monthly payment I have on my house is significantly less. And so therefore, if I'm less 10%, it is less, there's no doubt about it, but it's not quite 10%, because a large part of that I don't have to pay anymore because my interest that I paid on my house is lower. So where the challenge lies for individuals right now is collectively on those of us that are renting. And we have to actively challenge our landlords and say, but sorry sir, but the world is changing, we need to talk about our rent. Which we did ourselves in terms of our own landlord as well, and said that we appreciate the reality, but and I know we've had discussions with property companies at the same forum around what they are doing in terms of rent. So this is just collective. And then when you look at something called fuel, it's the cheapest we've had in 4 or 5 years. Now it's quite a simple maths. Just imagine what your salary was 5 years ago and what your salary is today, and you realize it's a bit more. And so the world is a bit resetting itself, and this is where it's so challenging for us, because we've always lived in a world that's called, well, I'm sitting here, I want to know what my salary increase is. And all of a sudden we're living in a world where costs are coming down in terms of interest rates, of fuel, and all of a sudden the whole discussion changes. And it's something we don't understand, we don't know how it works, but at the same time, it is a reality that we're in, and we have to find solutions.
Yeah, it really boils down to the fact that our inflation rate is obviously the big indicator for everybody that everybody watches. But I fear that the inflation rate will actually have quite a substantial downward trend in the next 6 months, if not a year, based on our GDP at the end of the day.
Yeah, so inflation is a very interesting number, and I'm an accountant by profession, so if I make the statement, it doesn't sound very positive, but I sometimes don't understand it. And the inflation rate in the next months to come will also be quite interesting. So you have this serious downward pressure on interest rates.
Exactly.
You have the serious downward pressure on fuel prices. So unfortunately, we are a country of transporters. We are a country of retailers. In other words, we don't really make too much of our own stuff, and so we transport everything. So those costs should significantly come down. What we've got to be careful, though, that is because of the disruption in supply and demand, because of the difficulty, especially in the last month, of getting goods into the country, that due to those frustrations, we may not see that benefit, and we may see the exact opposite.
Not fast, at least.
We may see the exact opposite, because unfortunately there's something called supply and demand, and therefore if more people want something that we can deliver, then the price goes up. So as NMH, with partners like Pick n Pay and transport companies, we when COVID happened, the first thing we focused on was how do we help to keep the gates open, the control points, because we realized at that point if those gates become too complicated and too difficult, then the flow of goods will result in the concept of supply and demand going wrong. And so we really worked hard on every level that first 2 weeks. I remember how we were running around just to find solutions, from making sure that those individuals that are working long hours are looked after, because it's easy to be critical, but to understand that's long hours. Yeah. And so the supply and demand right now is a very, very important part of this process. If we don't solve that thing, we may see the exact opposite of inflation. Not because things shouldn't be cheaper, it's just because we can't get it fast enough into the system, and therefore it becomes more expensive.
Yeah, and what essentially will likely happen in such a case is that the haves and have-nots, that divide will become even bigger then.
Yes,
because
yes.
you know, your salary will be contracting, people will buy less on that scale, but on the other hand, those that can afford it are prepared to pay more expensively, and that's exactly what we don't need in this country.
Yes, I mean, I remember at independence, the statements were made from the founding father, which I must be honest, I did not understand that time quite so well, but today I totally understand him and I totally salute him, was food security. And right now, food security is most probably the single most important thing that we need to reflect on ourselves and say, to what extent do we have food security? And we've come a long way. We've done a lot. I think so. As a country, we've achieved a lot more in terms of that, but a lot more needs to be done. And that is one of the reasons for that is to protect the pricing model. And it's a funny thing how you can get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, but at some stage you need to be sustainable.
Exactly.
And it's a funny thing how sustainability is much more important than to be cheap, because the opposite of that is very expensive, and then you have starvation.
Yeah, and then government can't help anymore.
So we got to make sure that when we look at food security, we look at mechanisms that allows us as a country to be sustainably supplying whatever that food is, and making sure that we protect those industries in the country to be able to deliver on a sustainable, affordable, and therefore how we protect anti-dumping has now become more important than ever before.
Yeah, and I can actually say from the standpoint of, or from the point of view from an employee, that generally I find that most of my colleagues actually agree with what is happening at NMH at the moment, where the mentality has changed from demand, rather saying, guys, we're in it together, we will take a cut. We do know that this is not necessarily permanent, but over the long run, we at least have a job, which is not that secure all over the country, really. So, but going further from that, at NMH, we've always promoted the safety aspect. I mean, we've been busy with the COVID show from day one, and we've made a point, most of our journalists were out there and sending us these daily clips, and still do. So where do you see that safety aspect moving forward?
Well, firstly, not just our journalists, but let's start with our own journalists. Thank them, really. I think we've been like soldiers in the battleground, on the forefront of making sure that the message gets across on a daily basis. It's really been an honor to be part of that team, and not just NMH journalists, but journalists in general in this country. And so that privilege that we've had, but at the same time the risk, and it was a risk. That we achieved. We really worked hard in terms of managing the safety of individuals, around how we applied our risk profiles within the organization, and I don't want to bore people with all the details. But we realized as well that it's not just about us as NMH, it's also about our readers, and we actively made sure that we were first in the market to get the message out in all languages of the country to everybody to understand that COVID-19 isn't something that just happens somewhere in the world. It's here, and that you, in your own language, understand this is what needs to be done. And then we realized there's a group of people called children, and that the message to them is just as important. We actively worked on how do we get a message to a child that's 6 to 10 years old, because the message to him is different. And so that they also understand that this is how things are and how you should apply. So we're very, very proud how we made sure that through languages, through reach of the country, and through age, that we're able to reach, we believe, everybody in the country through our message. And again, it just shows you that while you may have the right message, you've got to make sure that it reaches everybody. And at the same time realize that although we are focused on all platforms, and we're very proud to be on all platforms, we firmly saw once again how critically important print media is. It has a capacity like no other media to reach people in the furthest parts of the country, and to make sure that they get their message across. And so I'm very, very proud to say that print media played a critical role in this time of COVID.
Yeah, and safety is really something that touches us all. Speaking of safety, that's the one aspect. Business as usual, that was the other aspect you wanted to talk a bit about.
Yeah, so I think it's obvious cliche that business isn't as usual, but it's easy to make statements. It's easy to sit in front and to just play the PR. The challenge for us as NMH, but I think as a country and as Southern Africa and as Africa and then ultimately as the world is, how do you realign your business model in a world that has changed? It changed in 4 ways, I believe. Firstly, it's a lot smaller. And will it grow again? Definitely it will grow again. But that's the second challenge. Where are those growth points? And therefore you have to identify where the growth will be and be part of that solution. And thirdly, the way we engage will change. It's from wearing masks to social distancing to not going to the mall anymore, but ordering online, to working from home, to understanding that how schools will operate will be different. And you have to find then solutions for all that. So, and I think that on the one side it's a threat, but at the other side it's opportunity. So you've got to really sit down and say, how does the world look post-COVID? Now, of course, a lot of things that we think will carry on may not carry on. You know, life is always about extremes, and then we get back to a level of normality. But to think that it's exactly the same is not true. And one of the challenges that we're facing in this country is that as a country, we haven't had it easy in the last 4 years.
No, we haven't. Yeah.
I remember with the budget speech mid-term review when Honourable Minister Stefan made that statement around, we were in Hilton Hotel and he said, we have a challenge. And it was a shocking moment in my life personally. And since then, we've been struggling. And so as a country, we've had it difficult. We can blame the drought, we can blame the world economy, we can blame our own inefficiencies, we can blame corruption. Wherever you want to blame, it's fine, you can go there. But ultimately, the reality is facing you. And so
you won't just deny it, you have to face it.
Yeah, so it's easy to read the front page of a newspaper, and I know we're in that business, but ultimately you've got to face that reality. And that's where we are. So COVID-19's timing hasn't been the best of times for us as a country. And therefore, the challenges that we are facing in the public sector, but specifically in the private sector, is exponentially more now. And that makes it a lot more difficult. And therefore, whatever we go forward with, as NMH, as a media industry, and as a country, has to be one of working together. It has to be one of collaboration. It has to be one of finding common solutions. The us has become a lot more important than the me. And we at NMH are firmly committed to, first and foremost, working with all media houses in the country and finding common solutions. We respect that each person has, or business has, its own brand, but there's commonality. It's called printing, it's called distribution, it's called specific engagements. And so if you start looking at that and say, how do we work together? And in a lot of these areas we're already working together, but there's a lot more that we can do. And that's just our industry. And you'll find that when we get to our clients, you have to say, how do we work closer with our clients? And we get to our readers, we say, how can we work closer with you? So this is actually an unbelievable opportunity on the one side.
It pretty much is, because what essentially happens is media is now possibly at that point where we can do exactly what the tourism industry has been doing for a while. I mean, you've had the Hospitality Association, which, while everybody does his specific business in a certain way, there where they've got common interests, they join forces.
Yes.
Pretty much the same thing with your guides and all those sort of interests. So I pretty much support that notion that media needs to find the common interests and push on the same buttons there, and then do their little niche market. Typically, in my case, it's easy to speak because Allgemeine has got a niche market, but there are niche markets for everybody, and we need to find those ones and still not be permanent foes simply because we're working for different organizations.
A lot has happened, I must be honest. When I started here and where we are today, it's a whole different world already. What COVID-19 has just done is just forced that what hasn't been sorted out, we must sort out very, very quickly.
It's forcing our hands, sort of.
So this is tomorrow's another day. Logic is no longer a slogan we should be living by. And that what needs to be done now is most probably where we are. And sometimes I believe that's not a bad thing. I think sometimes we've allowed issues that have been growing over years, and in the name of we'll handle it tomorrow, we haven't sorted out. And that's why I am personally extremely excited about what's waiting for us. Is it hard? Is it difficult? Does it create conflict? But ultimately, when you sit back, and I don't want to say which year that will be, because that's like being an economist, which is a very dangerous place to be right now. But when you sit back, I firmly believe we will say it has been a good time.
Yeah, and talking of tourism, obviously we want to be involved in that as well. So the Tourism Expo is certainly still on. Where do you see our next steps and our future in that industry?
So we've had a lot of people phoning us about a lot of things over the last 40 days, and none less than the Tourism Expo, which was early June. We deliberately did not make any statements until we were sure. And the reason for that was we first needed to have certainty, one, that the official lockdown period has now been lowered to the next level. So that means we are moving to a level of more normality. And once we understood that, we were in a better position to realign where we would like to be. Now, what is fair to say is that tourism is and I personally believe this, most probably the cornerstone of our economy in terms of where we are and where we should be in years to come. And so this is not just a fly-by-night industry. This is something that's critical for the future of this country. And we're very proud to have been part of this process for 20 years. None of us own a lodge or own any businesses in this industry, but we are passionate about making that difference. And we believe that in the last 20 years that Namibian Tourism Expo has played a significant role in that process. But at the same time, we had to find solutions that fits into the scenarios of COVID-19 and regulations. And therefore, we decided to have the official expo in November, the first weekend of November. I think it's the 4th to the 7th of November. And the idea behind November was fourfold. Firstly, it was around the fact that we needed certainty around, that by then we believe there's a level of normality. Secondly, we did speak to role players in the industry and said that we really want to make a difference because it is about local tourism. Let's just be honest
for
here.
The first time in a long time.
We've been having the same message for 20 years. We've never changed our message. Sometimes people have not heard us as often as they should have, but we're happy to say that everybody's on the same page. So we're not trying to get thousands of Germans or French or Spaniards to come to the country. They're more than welcome to come, by the way. But there's another group of people that's marketing that. I personally, and I think as NMH, we've believed that tourism is as strong as local support, because there's an understanding how important it is, but more importantly, there's always ups and downs, and unfortunately, COVID-19 has proved how down can look like. And so secondly, it's about making sure that we reach people, and they felt that November was a good time, because it's the end of a season, and I know the season's going to be long still, we get to that just now. And thirdly, it's also about understanding that there's a lot of things that is happening and will happen. And although this is about tourism, it's also about events. And how you realign the concept of events post-COVID is a major opportunity. It's a challenge as well, but it's a major opportunity. And we believe that we will be able to showcase how events can look like post-COVID, because it won't be the same. It cannot be the same. And lastly, it's also about managing capacity. So we're not sure about event 1, 2, 3, and 4. That still may be happening between now and in November. And the last thing we've always said in our lives, and we firmly believe that, we never want to compete with anybody. We believe that as a country, we need to complement each other. And so we never wanted to be in the space where someone else is. And so basically, the next person in the row is November, and that's how we got to that date. So it's a consequences of a lot of events. Now to be arrogant and to say, well, don't worry, wait until November, and in November we start promoting tourism in this country, is definitely not what we're saying. And so how we actively be part of a solution to help, again, we have no direct interest there. How do we help the industry? We will, from the beginning of June, have an active campaign around how do we promote local tourism? How do we get people to be part of that solution so that in these usually high months, which usually we wouldn't too focused on the Namibian market, all of a sudden we are. And how can we be part of that solution from June till November in helping the local industry to fit? But more specifically, COVID is not a 3-month project, it's not a 6-month project,
Exactly.
It's most probably a way of life for at least 3 to 5 years. So in November, how do we make sure that the low season, it's called November to next year, April, which is...
How we survive that one.
How do we help and make sure that and that's our focus of the expo. But our focus on tourism does not start in November. It starts the 1st of June. And you'll say, why not tomorrow? Well, because there's a couple of things we need to sort out practically. And we could phone people in April, but no one answered their phones because everybody was in lockdown. Which was what law was. We have no problem with that. So we are extremely excited about how we can play a role and continue to play a role in ensuring that local tourism, which, as I said earlier, is critical for this industry specifically.
I think it's really a mind change in the whole tourism industry. Yes, for a moment, some of them will possibly not make huge profits. This is really about playing the survival game, possibly building a base on the local tourism to let your business survive, and in future use the foreign visits as I'd almost call it pudding. But I think anybody in tourism would be naive to believe that they can, for the rest of the future, rely on just foreign tourism. I think this is a huge wake-up call, possibly much harder than we ever expected or wanted it. But I truly believe that tourism needs to focus on the local people first, simply to have a base, and from the base start working to the foreign tourists. Something that's not new. The concept is not new, but I think we were spoiled for business for a while now.
Yeah, I don't want to get involved with the detail of that because I have strong views about it, but I do recognize that there's a challenge right now and that we want to be part of that solution. And we really want to help an industry that, as I said earlier, firmly believe is the future of this country in terms of not just GDP, because I'm not a big fan of GDP, but job creation, and not just job creation, but job creations in the area where people live. One of the biggest challenges you have with job creation is people move to the urban areas, and firmly puts new pressures on those systems. Whereas tourism has the capacity to create jobs where people live.
But that's why I strongly believe in this new thing that they've got going now, because we today actually reported about it in Allgemeine, because you have a sudden drive to support the conservancies.
Yes.
Because we need to make these guys survive now. They just need to just make it to the next year so that they can have their normal income again. This is really not about them having huge surpluses. It's just to make them stay where they are, maintain what they've got, and maybe even maintain it and build it up so that when the up comes, then we can actually take it up and we can accommodate those people coming from overseas, give a quality service. So I'm actually excited about this as well, because I think we're now possibly at the bottom where we could ever be.
Now, conservancies has been one of the wonderful stories about tourism in this country, and I think one of the reasons why we've been so successful internationally. But you're right. Right now they need protection as well, and I think that's basically where we're coming from as NMH is let's protect what we have, and the only way we're going to do that is every person has to contribute, and yes, some of us, including myself, it means that we need to take a salary cut. But at the same time, it's not just taking the salary cut. That's not going to solve it. We have to sit down and say, where are the opportunities and how do we make sure that we find a permanent solution? None of us are volunteering to just take a pay cut and say, well, that's the end of it. That's not what we're saying. We're trying to say that this is the reality that we're in. We're protecting what we've got. How do we find solutions going forward? And I think tourism is doing the same.
Yeah, and that's why tourism is the one sector where we can really improve. The other thing is on our media market, we can certainly improve in terms of working together, getting cooperation with the other papers and media houses. So in closing, where do you see us in a year?
I'm extremely excited about the 1st of May 2021. And I smile because I remember the 1st of May 2019, and we started with our first broadcast on Press Freedom Day, which I think was the 3rd. And how we've evolved as an institution and as an organization in 12 months has been just unbelievable. And I believe in 12 months' time we'll make that statement again. And so I believe we'll be in a society that cares a lot more. I believe we'll be in a society that understands that the safety net of health is important. I believe that we'll find that although profits are an important part of a business model, that there are bigger things in life than chasing the bottom line. First and foremost, to say that it doesn't matter what you do in life, you have to do it sustainably. You can't just spend money. Money does not fall out of the air. You have to do it in such a way that it's sustainable. And the devil's in that detail. What is that definition? And I believe that you'll find that the cooperation between government and the private sector will be significantly better. And I think that's been maybe the sad part in the last couple of years, that we've not worked well with each other. And last but most importantly, I believe that we have to find solutions. We can't deny the fact that poverty is a reality of this country. Yeah. And that we have to collectively be partners in making that difference. You can't live in isolation. You can't live in your COVID locked up home, which we have been doing, not for 40 days, but many of us for 40 years.
Yeah, possibly. So on that note, thank you for joining me in the studio, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you again.